Officer Jack Lucky Martinez stood at his post in the Nexus 9 Intergalactic Detention Center, watching with mild amusement as a group of new alien guards huddled at the far end of the corridor, occasionally casting nervous glances his way. After 3 years on the job, he was used to this reaction. Being the only human on staff had that effect. "Did you know they can survive multiple bone fractures?" one whispered, its translucent antenna quivering with anxiety. "I heard they can regrow their outer shell," another chimed in, all 6 eyes widening in horror. "That's fingernails," Lucky muttered under his breath, long past the point of correcting these misunderstandings. "We can regrow fingernails." The huddle of guards scattered like startled space pigeons when Lucky shifted his weight slightly. He sighed, checked his watch, standard Earth time, despite the facility running on Galactic Standard, and braced for another thrilling day of being treated like a walking apocalypse. The thing was, Lucky hadn't asked to be assigned to Nexus 9. He'd actually applied to be a mall cop back in Phoenix. But apparently, when your species hails from what the Galactic Council classifies as a Class 12 Deathworld, career options become complicated. The insurance costs alone meant most places wouldn't hire humans for security work. Something about being too effective. Nexus 9 itself was a marvel of alien architecture, if you were into physics-defying, geometric impossibilities. The prison was built like a Klein bottle turned inside out, with gravity that shifted direction depending on the section. The security systems were just as bizarre, from quantum-entangled force fields to empathy amplifiers that made inmates feel really, really bad about their life choices. Lucky's personal favorite was the moral recalibration chamber, which was just a room where they showed prisoners pictures of baby animals from various planets. Somehow, this was considered maximum security therapy in 7-star systems. "Officer Martinez," a chirping voice called from behind him. Lucky turned to face Warden Assistant Pip Pop, a floating cloud of bioluminescent particles that had somehow managed to wear a clip-on tie. "Your quarterly psychological evaluation is due. We need to ensure your inherent Deathworlder aggression remains within acceptable parameters." Lucky nodded, keeping his face neutral. "Of course. Would you like me to fill out Form 223B now, or after I finish terrifying the new hires for the day?" "Oh, Pip Pop's particles scattered slightly in alarm. "Perhaps after your shift, when you're less human. I'll try to schedule that in between my daily ritual of consuming the souls of my enemies and my evening workout." Pip Pop let out a nervous sound, like wind chimes having an anxiety attack, and floated away. Lucky checked his watch again and resumed his patrol, passing cells that held some of the galaxy's most dangerous criminals. A telepathic tax evader. A sentient cloud of cosmic dust that had tried to trademark the concept of darkness. And, of course, Professor Squeaks, the hyper-intelligent space hamster currently attempting to teach quantum physics to his fellow inmates using sunflower seeds as equations. Lucky made a mental note to request another contraband audit. Advanced calculus probably counted as a weapon in at least 3 sectors. His morning took a turn for the worse when Head Warden Blip Blorp summoned him to the administrative nebula. Unlike most offices, which had things like walls and floors, this one was a swirling mass of ionized gas where bureaucratic decisions were made by beings who considered solid matter a passing fad. "Officer Martinez," Blip Blorp burbled, their gelatinous form rippling with what might have been concern, or indigestion. "We have received troubling reports about your recent behavior." Lucky raised an eyebrow. "Is this about the coffee machine in the break room? Because I already explained that humans don't actually gain strength by consuming the souls of innocent beverages." No. Blip Blorp wobbled dismissively. "This concerns your alarming display of Deathworlder traits during last week's mandatory peace meditation." "You mean, when I sneezed? You expelled foreign matter from your body at speeds exceeding 100 kilometers per hour. 3 empaths called in sick, and Officer Z is still recovering from the emotional trauma of witnessing such biological violence." Lucky pinched the bridge of his nose. "It's allergy season back on Earth. I can't help it if quantum pollen gets up my nose." Nevertheless, Blip Blorp continued, their voice taking on the tone of a middle manager about to make someone else's life difficult. We must insist on additional precautions. The Safety Committee has prepared a list of new protocols for managing your human tendencies. They extended a tentacle, unrolling a scroll of parchment that drifted down the corridor. Section 1, Paragraph 1, all human personnel must provide 2 weeks' notice before engaging in any involuntary biological functions. Lucky was saved from having to explain bodily functions by a sudden flickering of the quantum lights. The nebula dimmed, and Lucky could have sworn he heard giggling. Probably just a quantum hiccup, Blip Blorp said, though their gelatinous form quivered anxiously. Now, regarding the proper procedure for containing human emotional outbursts. But Lucky wasn't listening. His instincts, the same ones that had told his ancestors, yes, that rustle in the grass is definitely a predator, and no, that brightly colored berry is not food, were screaming that something was very wrong. The lights flickered again. This time, the giggling was unmistakable. It was coming from the quantum physics lab, where Professor Squeaks was supposedly serving time for attempting to teach quantum entanglement to a group of impressionable space gerbils. Warden, Lucky interrupted, when was the last time anyone checked the quantum containment fields? The what? Blip Blorp's form rippled in confusion. Oh, those. Well, according to subsection 7.3 of the maintenance guidelines, quantum containment field inspections are scheduled for the third Tuesday of every month, unless that Tuesday falls on a solar eclipse, in which case. The lights went out completely. When they flickered back on, every security screen displayed the same image, a tiny hamster face wearing a miniature evil genius monocle. Greetings, inferior intellects, Professor Squeak's voice squeaked through the facility's communication system. In approximately 17.3 minutes, accounting for quantum uncertainty, of course, this facility will bear witness to the greatest prison break in galactic history. Lucky sighed and checked his watch. It wasn't even time for his coffee break yet. Oh dear, Blip Blorp burbled. This is most irregular. I'll need to file an emergency situation report in triplicate. With all due respect, Warden, Lucky said, already heading for the door, maybe we skip the paperwork this time? Skip the paperwork? Blip Blorp turned a pale shade of shock. But that's not, we can't just, what about subsection 7.3? But Lucky was already gone, sprinting down the corridor toward the quantum physics lab. Just another day at Nexus 9, where the most dangerous inmate was a hamster with a PhD in quantum mechanics, and the only hope of stopping him was a human who couldn't even sneeze without causing an interstellar incident. The ability to exist in multiple timelines simultaneously was fascinating, but as Professor Squeaks launched into what promised to be a lengthy monologue about academic freedom and the oppressive nature of linear time, Lucky noticed something odd about the quantum processes forming the hamster's throne. They weren't just stolen equipment, they were connected to the prison's main security grid. Furthermore, Squeaks continued, now pacing back and forth atop his throne, the arbitrary restrictions on quantum mechanics education in a prison environment are not only discriminatory but fundamentally. Professor, Lucky interrupted, did you seriously hack the entire prison security system just so you could teach more physics classes? The hamster froze mid-gesture. Hack is such an ugly word. I prefer quantum reconfiguration of binary possibilities. And technically, I didn't do the hacking, my students did. Your students? But you've been in solitary confinement for the past week. Professor Squeak's tiny face broke into what could only be described as a smug grin. Ah, but you're thinking in four-dimensional terms, my dear primate. Thanks to my latest breakthrough in quantum entanglement theory, I've been teaching classes across multiple parallel timelines simultaneously. The hack you're seeing now? It already happened, is happening, and will happen across at least 17 different quantum realities. Lucky felt a headache coming on. This was exactly why he had failed physics in high school. So what you're saying is, the prison break began 3 days ago, 2 weeks from now, and somewhere around next Tuesday, all at the same time? Precisely. Professor Squeaks declared triumphantly. Even as we speak, my students are applying their knowledge of quantum mechanics to, shall we say, expand their horizons beyond conventional space-time. As if on cue, alarms blared throughout the facility, but instead of the usual siren, the sound system blasted what sounded suspiciously like Flight of the Bumblebee being performed by a quantum computer having an existential crisis. Warning, the prison AI announced, its voice shifting unpredictably through multiple octaves. Multiple quantum anomalies detected in cell blocks A through Q. Inmates are currently existing in a superposition of escaped and not escaped. Also, the cafeteria is now serving lunch from next Thursday, and someone has taught the vacuum energy in cell block D to play chess. Lucky stared at Professor Squeaks. Professor Squeaks stared back. In the distance, Warden Blip Blop could be heard wailing about the impossibility of filing paperwork for events that both had and hadn't happened yet. You know, Lucky said slowly, I'm pretty sure this qualifies as one of those situations they warned me about in orientation, the one where they said, and I quote, in case of a reality-threatening emergency, the human is authorized to use whatever means necessary. Professor Squeak's whiskers twitched nervously. And what exactly does that mean? Lucky smiled. It was not a reassuring smile. It was the kind of smile that reminded everyone why humans were classified as Deathworld predators. It means, Professor, that I'm about to introduce you to something far more terrifying than quantum mechanics. And that is human bureaucracy. As Professor Squeak's quantum-powered prison break unfolded across multiple timelines, Lucky did something that no alien in the facility had ever seen a human do before. He pulled out a clipboard. What is that? Professor Squeaks asked, his tiny monocle fogging up with concern. Lucky held it up, flipping through the attached stack of papers. Oh, this is just Form 47B, Emergency Response Protocol for Multidimensional Incidents. You see, before I can officially respond to your prison break, I need to document it in triplicate across all affected timelines. The hamster's whiskers twitched. But that's impossible. The quantum fluctuations alone would. Section 1, Lucky read aloud, pacing the room with deliberate slowness. Please list all parallel universes affected by the incident, including but not limited to alternate timelines, pocket dimensions, and any realities where entropy runs backwards. Use additional sheets if necessary. In their cells, inmates who had been in the process of quantum tunneling through walls suddenly snapped back to their original positions. The mere concept of having to fill out paperwork across multiple dimensions was causing the quantum probability fields to collapse in protest. Section 2, Lucky continued mercilessly, for each affected reality, provide detailed documentation of the exact moment of divergence, including witness statements from all temporal duplicates. Note, temporal duplicates must have their statements notarized by a licensed quantum notary. Stop! Professor Squeaks squeaked, covering his ears. You can't just, bureaucracy doesn't work like that. But Lucky was just getting started. Section 3, Insurance Liability in Non-Euclidean Spaces. Please note that any damage to the spacetime continuum must be reported to your quantum insurance provider within 24 business hours, as measured in each affected dimension. Throughout the prison, reality began reasserting itself. The quantum anomalies collapsed one by one, unable to maintain coherence in the face of pure, weapons-grade bureaucratic procedure. Warning, the AI announced, its voice stabilizing, quantum field collapse in progress. Also, the cafeteria is now serving today's lunch today, which is a significant improvement over serving next Thursday's lunch. Professor Squeaks slumped on his throne of quantum processors. But my beautiful quantum physics classes. My students were just learning how to exist as waves and particles simultaneously. About that, Lucky said, flipping to a new page. I'm going to need you to fill out an educational program modification request form. In accordance with Section 5, subsection C of the Prison Educational Guidelines, all changes to the spacetime continuum for educational purposes must be approved by the Board of Quantum Education at least 2 parallel universes in advance. The last of the quantum anomalies fizzled out with a noise that sounded suspiciously like a sad trombone. In the distance, Warden Blip Blop was chittering excitedly about the return of linear causality. But they weren't out of danger yet. As the quantum fields collapsed, Lucky noticed something alarming on one of the still-functioning monitors. The prison's artificial gravity system was going haywire. Apparently, teaching quantum physics to the fabric of reality had some unexpected side effects. "Attention all personnel," the AI announced. "Gravity will be temporarily experiencing an existential crisis. Please secure all non-anchored objects and prepare for rapid changes in the definition of up." Lucky looked at Professor Squeaks. Professor Squeaks looked at Lucky. And then, because the universe has a sense of humor, the floor decided to become the ceiling. "I don't suppose," Lucky said, now hanging upside down from what used to be the floor, "that any of your quantum physics lessons covered how to fix a gravity generator that's questioning its purpose in life?" Professor Squeaks, still clinging to his throne, shook his tiny head. "That would be more in the realm of existential engineering. I focus primarily on theoretical physics and creative timeline manipulation." Lucky sighed, watching as various objects and several surprised-looking aliens floated past the lab door. "Right. Looks like we're doing this the human way. And that is? Improvise. Break several safety regulations. And then fill out an incident report that creatively redefines the word incident." The floating trays began settling back onto tables as the gravity generator, after a brief existential crisis, decided that steady employment was preferable to philosophical rebellion. With a final shudder, it ceased its erratic behavior. Lucky folded his arms and delivered his verdict. "Be advised, any unauthorized suspension of physical laws will result in mandatory attendance at workplace harmony seminars, where you will be required to participate in team-building exercises with other fundamental forces." That did it. The gravity generator surrendered immediately. Reality snapped back to normal, and Lucky and Professor Squeaks found themselves standing upright on solid ground once more. "I don't understand," Professor Squeaks said, his whiskers twitching in confusion. "How did bureaucracy triumph over quantum physics?" Lucky smiled as he tucked away his clipboard. "Professor, there's something you should know about humans. We didn't become the galaxy's most feared species by being stronger, faster, or tougher than everyone else. We became the most feared species because we invented paperwork and then figured out how to weaponize it. But surely the pure mathematics of quantum mechanics are impervious to a properly formatted request form in triplicate?" Lucky checked his watch. "Now, about those unauthorized physics lessons." Professor Squeak's tiny shoulders slumped. "I don't suppose you'd be willing to misplace the paperwork for my quantum physics classes if I agree to teach something less hazardous? Perhaps theoretical basket weaving? Or introductory chaos theory?" "Funny you should mention that," Lucky said, pulling out yet another form. "I just happen to have an application for alternative educational program implementation right here." In the days following what came to be known as the Great Quantum Incident, or, as the official report labeled it, Temporal Anomaly Resolution Event 47B, subsection Educational, life at Nexus 99 underwent several notable changes. First, Professor Squeaks was appointed head of the newly established Department of Non-Reality Threatening Sciences, where he redirected his genius into teaching inmates about quantum mechanics through the safe medium of interpretive dance. His wave-particle waltz became particularly popular among the gaseous entities in Cell Block C. Second, the gravity generator received a formal employment contract, complete with benefits and paid vacation days. It still occasionally made things float during its lunch break, but now it filed the proper paperwork first. The biggest change, however, came in the form of a new prison policy handed down directly from the Galactic Council. Lucky learned about it during his next meeting with Warden Blip-Blop in the Administrative Nebula. "Officer Martinez." The gelatinous warden burbled excitedly, their form rippling with barely contained bureaucratic glee. "Your handling of the quantum physics incident has led to a revolutionary breakthrough in correctional facility management." Lucky sighed. "If this is about the paperwork, I already apologized for using Earth Standard forms instead of Galactic Standard." No. Blip-Blop wobbled dismissively. "The Council has reviewed your methods and reached an unprecedented conclusion. Humans aren't terrifying because they're Deathworlders. They're terrifying because they invented bureaucracy. Lucky blinked. I'm sorry, what? Think about it. While other species evolved natural weapons and defense mechanisms, humans developed something far more formidable, the ability to impose order on chaos through endless forms and procedures. Your species took the fundamental uncertainty of the universe and decided to make it fill out registration papers. That's not exactly. The Council has already issued new guidelines. Blip Blop continued, extruding several tentacles worth of documents. All maximum security prisons in the galaxy are now required to employ at least one human in their administrative department. Your species' natural ability to weaponize paperwork is simply too valuable to ignore. And so, in a twist that not even quantum physics could have predicted, humans went from being feared as savage Deathworlders to being feared as savage Deathworlders who could also file taxes. Across the galaxy, prison wardens began recruiting humans, not for their strength or durability, but for their intimate knowledge of bureaucratic procedure and their ability to quell riots with the mere threat of filling out incident reports in triplicate. As for Lucky, he received a promotion to head of security and paperwork implementation, a position created specifically to harness what the Council called humanity's terrifying mastery of administrative warfare. His office wall now proudly displayed a framed copy of Form 47B, right next to a quantum physics equation that Professor Squeaks had written in sunflower seeds. You know, the hamster remarked one day during their regularly scheduled and officially sanctioned chess match, I still can't believe your species managed to bureaucratize quantum physics. Lucky moved his knight to take Professor Squeak's bishop. That's because you're thinking about it wrong, Professor. Quantum physics says everything exists in a state of probability until it's observed. But bureaucracy? Bureaucracy says nothing exists until it's been properly documented, filed, and approved in triplicate. And which one is more powerful? Lucky pulled out his clipboard. I'd tell you, but first, you'll need to fill out a request for philosophical discussion form. The professor's horrified squeak echoed all the way to the administrative nebula, where Warden Blip Blop was busy updating the prison's official species threat assessment rankings. Under humans, they added a new category. Warning, approach with extreme caution. Known to respond to any situation with overwhelming bureaucratic force. The only species in the galaxy that considers paperwork a weapon of mass destruction. And that, dear readers, is why to this day, every maximum security prison in the galaxy employs at least one human. Not because we're strong. Not because we're tough. But because we're the only species crazy enough to look at the fundamental chaos of the universe and say, you know what this needs? A really good filing system. End note, this document has been properly filed in accordance with Galactic Literary Standards, Form 89C, Humorous Narrative Submissions, Subtype, Humanity's Weird Quirks. All temporal paradoxes created during the telling of this story have been properly documented and archived.